Hello and welcome. My name is Brad Bell. I am the William J. Conity Professor of Strategic Human Resources here in the ILR School. I also serve as the Academic Director of CAHRS. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our final CAHRS cast for 2024. I'm really excited about today's CAHRS cast because it's going to feature our two CAHRS research assistants that have been working with us over the course of the semester around this topic of HR business partnering in the modern workplace. So why focus on this topic? This work that Ashley and Ryan, who I'll introduce in a second, have been doing is part of a larger project that CAHRS has launched around really understanding how the HR business partner role is changing, some of the challenges and opportunities within this space, and kind of thinking about where the role might be headed in the future. This work has been kind of spurred by a couple realizations. One is that the HR business partner role is probably more important than ever. Given all the changes and disruptions that we've seen over the last several years, organizations are not only dramatically transforming their business models, but also their HR functions. And the HRBPs obviously sit at this nexus and therefore really play a critical role in driving transformation on both fronts. In addition, we know that the role of the HR business partner has been and will continue to evolve as we see things like technology and AI continue to reshape how we deliver HR in the modern workplace. So Ryan and Ashley have been helping us over the course of this semester to really kick off this project by doing a in-depth review of the academic literature, really to try to understand what do we know about HR business partnering and some of its success factors. They also participated with us in a working group that we did in mid-October with a group of senior HRBPs to understand some of the challenges they're facing in the role. And we were also drawing on some other data sources around surveys and other things. And they'll certainly share more about this as we get into it. I'll introduce them in a second, but I want to highlight at the outset that we would love for you to actively participate in today's session. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. One is by submitting your questions. So you can use the Q&A function here within Zoom, or you can submit your questions via chat. I have both pulled up, so we'll be pulling questions from both of those as we go through. We've left time at the end to field your questions, but feel free to submit that at any point during the presentation. And again, we'll address them at the end. The other way is to use the chat to interact and exchange with one another. I encourage you to share your own experiences, your own reactions as we go throughout today's session. And just as a note up front, because that's usually the first question we get, is yes, we'll be sharing a copy of the slides out with everyone along with a recording. So you will have those as resources and encourage you to certainly share those with others in your organization who might benefit from today's presentation. So I'm really excited to introduce our two presenters today, Ashley Hamilton and Ryan Odibo. I want to provide a little bit of background about each of them. So prior to his role as a research assistant, Ryan earned a master's in education from Harvard University, where he served as an equity and inclusion fellow with a degree specialization in education, leadership, organizations, and entrepreneurship. Ryan's passionate about exploring the future of work, focusing on the intersection of education and employment and their profound economic and societal impacts. As an RA, Ryan has dedicated his efforts to examining trends and practices that shape the evolving workplace landscape. And I think you'll see that the project today is a good example of that. Our second presenter is Ashley Hamilton. Ashley is a second-year MBA MILR candidate at Cornell with 10 years of experience across corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors. Her professional and personal experiences have fueled her passion at the intersection of change management, HR analytics, technological advancements, and DEI. So again, really happy to have Ryan and Ashley with us today to share their work. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with this semester, and I think you'll be able to get a lot of insights from the findings that they'll share out. So with that, Ashley and Ryan, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. So to get us started, there we go. So as Professor Bell had mentioned this already, everything that you're going to be seeing today is really kind of the culmination of our 4-month-long kind of deep dive into the theoretical and real-world applications of what we're seeing within the HR business partner role. I won't reiterate everything that was mentioned previously, but one of the things that I want to just level set with you all in regards to how we're structuring today's conversation is we're first going to spend a little bit of time talking about, what exactly are the expectations of a HR business partner. So what exactly are they being asked to do? And then from there, sharing what do we see as kind of the top 10 competencies that are shaping what makes a successful HR business partner. And then from there, we'll wrap up our presentation with a little bit more recounting on what are some of the future potential areas for us to do some more exploration. So no surprise here, HR business partners are present across multiple different organizations, but one of the things that we've seen consistently true is that the role varies quite a bit. And that role varying can vary even within an organization. You may have one department that has an HR business partner during a certain type of role, and then in a different department, a completely different role. Now, while there are these differences, one of the things that we have seen true, though, is the fact that there are some foundational competencies that really allow an HR business partner to be successful. And then also with that, there are some key commonalities also in regards to the challenges that they face. So our first insight that we want to share with you kind of comes from a paper from McCracken et al. And what they were really looking at here is this is kind of providing a little bit of a insight into why exactly HR business partner roles vary so much. What their paper looked at was this 2x2 matrix of really looking at solidarity versus sociability. And solidarity, they defined as this is related to the need to create a shared understanding of task/goals, or really what breaks down to role clarity. And then sociability is really thinking about how exactly are we thinking about the terms of friendliness and mutual respect when we're looking at the relationships between an HR business partner and a line manager. And so as you can see here, there are a multitude of different ways and permutations that this can end up manifesting itself in an organization, as well as across organizations. And this in large part is the reason why we're seeing HR business partner roles vary so much. In particular, you'll see here one of the key things that we're trying to aim for is that high box in the upper right-hand quadrant that's really looking at a communal culture where we're not only seeing that mutual respect, but also role clarity. But more often than not, as we've heard from practitioners throughout this, we're more often not kind of falling into the networked culture area where we're seeing high trust, great relationships, but maybe there's a little bit of ambiguity in regards to who exactly owns which types of tasks. And so we provide this just as our first insight into why there is so much role variability. But like we said, this is not today's focus of the presentation. Instead, the focus is really going to be on what are the things that we are seeing HR business partners being asked to do, and how can we make sure we're creating the most competent HR business partners for the future. So with this, one of our other insights that we came about was from all of our conversations, we noticed the fact that HR business partners' responsibilities tend to fall into 5 buckets. The first one is looking at thought partnership. And the way to think about this is really, this one is emphasizing that collaboration between a line manager and an HR business partner. So an example of this might be collaborating with a line manager to consider the modifications to the people strategy that's needed to be able to make a business strategy come to life. The next one is strategic insight. So this is really thinking about how are we using our analytical abilities to decipher people analytics, and then from there being able to generate what are some insights and recommendations on how to help our teams. The third one is looking at change management. So thinking about how are we helping guide our teams through transitions, and at the same time, also perhaps being a translator between what we're seeing coming from corporate HR and how do we translate that to our teams. The fourth bucket is looking more at administrative tasks. So this is really thinking about how are we helping manage and further evolve the policies and processes that our teams are being held accountable to. And then the fifth bucket is really focused on this area of crisis management. So how are we assisting our teams in navigating the unknown? An example here is if you think about going back to the onset of the pandemic, how did HR business partners assist their people managers in thinking about what does the new state of work look like and how do we assist them? And while these buckets are looking at kind of the ideal expectations, sometimes there can be a bit of a gap between what is being said and what is actually happening in reality. And so with this, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I'm now going to talk about HRBP expectations versus reality and finding ways to navigate those gaps. So HRBPs are expected to be strategic leaders, anticipating workforce needs, aligning HR efforts with business goals, and managing transitions with ease. They're seen as compliance experts, industry-savvy advisors, and crisis leaders who guide organizations through challenges with innovative and employee-focused solutions. In reality, operational demands often take over, leaving little time for strategic work. Resistance to change can shift focus from planning to conflict resolution, and administrative tasks like compliance and system management can be overwhelming. Crises add another layer to unpredictability, forcing HRBPs to constantly react rather than innovate. The challenge lies in bridging this gap. To meet expectations, HRBPs need better support, resources, and a stronger focus on their strategic role over day-to-day firefighting. Next slide, please. So we decided to break the competencies down in several different areas. The first being foundations for success. So the three foundations for success that we saw in terms of competencies were business acumen. HRBPs need to have business acumen and have the ability to quickly ingest a business situation and the corresponding financial circumstances to make recommendations that holistically promote alignment to business objectives and success. Next is data proficiency. This idea of understanding and understanding and having a comfortability with identifying appropriate key performance indicators, sourcing data and analyzing inputs, etc. And then technology proficiency, understanding and having comfortability, staying abreast on changing technology trends and exploring ways tech can optimize workflows to create capacity. Next slide, please. The next competency bucket that we created was driving strategy. So the four areas that we have are sensing, systems-minded, scalability, and prioritization. Sensing is the ability to keep a pulse of the inner workings of the organization and the shifting tides of the employee experience through direct and indirect feedback loops. Systems-minded is this idea of being able to think in terms of the system and in terms of the organization. So this mindset examines situations from a holistic perspective that address the complexity and the interplay of the internal and external forces of the organization. Next is scalability. It's the ability to develop and recommend strategies, processes, and systems with potential to contribute to the organization's growth and evolving needs. And lastly is prioritization. It's the ability to identify and focus on the most critical initiatives that align best with the organization's goals, addressing both short-term demands and long-term objectives. Next slide, please. So then we move on to soft skills. Hard skills are definitely needed here, but HRBPs also need to find a way to balance with having soft skills as well. So the first two, well, the two that we have are relationship building, the ability to connect and build trust with others that leads to optimal collaboration, leveraging the network effect of this skill to be a connector in the organization across HR and different functions. And then written and verbal communication, the ability to clearly and concisely communicate key messages across multiple modalities and the ability to tailor the messaging to be relevant to different stakeholders. Next slide, please. At the heart of these is courage, the confidence to push back or challenge decisions when necessary. It's not about being confrontational, but about sparking conversations that ensure all angles are considered before making a move. This is essential for driving better outcomes, even if it means taking the unpopular stance. Next slide. So we wanted to find a way to connect these competencies to roles and make sure we're prioritizing what matters most. So we created a heat map here with the different responsibility buckets across competencies. And the darker the color, the higher the prioritization and the higher the necessity, and the lighter the color, the lower the necessity. Not every competency is equally important all the time. It depends on the specific demands of the role. So for example, an HRBP focused on strategy will lean heavily on analytical and planning skills, while someone managing a crisis might need quick decision-making and strong interpersonal skills. The context, whether it's driving long-term change or addressing immediate challenges, determines which skills take priority. This adaptability ensures that HRBPs can deliver value no matter the situation. Next slide, please. So just looking forward, we had an amazing time doing this research, but we only had 3 months, and so we're looking forward. And when we were looking forward, we had some buckets that we were thinking about in terms of next steps for exploration. The first being a need for role definition and standardization. So HRBPs, we've been doing this research and we've been finding the different competencies and areas for improvement, but we've still realized that this role needs to be standardized. And we also recognize that across organizations, the role might look different. So we're thinking about for next steps is how can we find a way to just create certain competencies that align across organizations, across industries. Next is measuring HRBP strategic impact. It's one thing to be able to say, what do you do and how do you do it? But it's another way to actually create measurements around this impact. And so whether maybe it's creating key performance indicators, whether it's creating kind of a roadmap, whether it's creating or just having essentially like just ways to quantify the impact is incredibly important, and we think that could be a next step in this process. Next is technology to free up capacity. In the working groups, we heard from several HRBPs talking about how artificial intelligence and technology is definitely something they've been thinking about, is on their minds. And so we're thinking about how can we leverage this kind of technology to allow the HRBPs to be able to do the more strategic work that they were brought in to do. And then lastly, in HRBP community of practice, just finding ways to continue to learn. We heard in the working groups as well that the HRBPs are always looking for ways to improve themselves, looking for ways to improve their skills. And one way that we think that this could be accomplished is through creating communities of practice, creating networks, finding ways for business leaders to be able to come together and talk through a lot of the skills and a lot of the weaknesses that they feel as though they've been experiencing. All right, I'm going to move it on to Ashley.
So at this time, we would love to open up the floor to any questions you all might have. We know that we just went through quite a bit, so happy to dive deeper into any areas that might be of interest.
Great, thanks, Ashley and Ryan. So again, would welcome any questions or insights that anyone in the audience has today. And as we do that, some have already been, coming in, so we'll maybe start with those and look for others. So maybe starting at, one question that I had actually based on one of your later slides was you talk about this idea of kind of role definition and standardization. And can you just say a little bit more about that? Why do you think that is a particularly fruitful area? How might it impact how organizations think about the role, how they maybe engage in workforce planning, retention, other kind of aspects of, really kind of making this role as successful as possible?
Absolutely. So I think one of the big things that we heard from the working group as well as from the CAHRS partner meeting was this idea of the fact that this role is a catch-all role. Oftentimes you are trying to do everything that's coming and you're trying your best to do it to the utmost degree. But oftentimes, to your point, thinking about just from a workforce planning perspective, that can be very intimidating for someone who is thinking about potentially entering into this role. And so this number one has the opportunity, if we create more role definition around this, to perhaps be able to attract more talent into the role. Additionally, when we're thinking about it from a retention perspective, by being able to have better role definition, we're being able to create more direction in regards to where people should be investing their time, but also within that, also creating a better work-life balance. It's not to say that there aren't going to be those moments where you're going to need to step in and go a little outside of the bounds of what your role is defined as. But it also helps create a little bit more of that clarity so that things don't fall through the cracks either. We know that oftentimes the people that HRBPs are working most closely with, people managers, are also super stretched and have a lot of they're kind of seen as the linchpin oftentimes for an organization in regards to being able to roll out things. And so we know for both of these partners, both of these different parties, that there's a lot of things that could be going on. And so by creating a little bit more role definition, we're going to be able to do better role clarity, which then goes back to kind of the research that we saw up front, being like, if we were able to have better role clarity, then we're actually able to have better communication with each other and hopefully then also be able to build upon increasing our relationships.
Great. So there's a lot of questions coming in. One question, I think this goes to the point you just mentioned, Ashley, around kind of role clarity / variability. question is, what are the biggest drivers for the different HRBP roles within the same company, right? So I think we can think about how different companies might think about or approach the HRBP role, but even within the same company, you might find substantial differences. So does that kind of go back to your 2x2, or is that more driven maybe by, the nature of the business the person's sitting in, or other factors in your mind?
Yeah, great question. I also want to create space, Ryan. If you want to hop in, please don't let me steamroll you on this one.
Great. I can if you want,
Yeah,
Ashley.
please. Sure.
Sure. This is a great question. I think specifically relating to the business itself, like within the individual organization. I think that role creation a lot of times might depend on the individual themselves. In our research, we were trying to find ways, or trying to find pathways to the HRBP role. We are trying to kind of scale back and try to understand, where do HRBPs come from? Are they coming from talent acquisition? Are they coming, from the other sides of the business? And we recognize that essentially the role really is different across the board. And so we think that in terms of creating role definition, it's this idea of essentially like leaning to individual strengths, right? If someone has greater strengths in talent acquisition, maybe we find ways to put them on more projects relating to that. If someone has more strengths, in compensation, maybe putting them in more roles that we were kind of finding in our heads. When we were towards the end of our research, we were thinking, how can HRBP essentially become a consultant within the organization? And consultants have various skill sets and various areas where they have more strengths and weaknesses. So we're trying to find ways to balance out, okay, how can we allow the HRBP to be more strategic and doing work that they're used to and work that they're very comfortable with, while also allowing opportunities for growth.
The one other thing that I think I'd also put in there is kind of going back to Brad, what you were mentioning around, is that part of this just the nature of the business. So much of this role is subjective in regards to the way it currently manifests. And I think one of the other things, and this goes along with kind of our second area of recommendation, is when things are left up to chance in regards to the definition of the role, oftentimes a business leader may or may not, depending on what their past relationship with HR, that might in fact shape what they see as their future relationship with HR. And so they might already have a preconceived notion of, oh, this is what an HR business partner role should look like based off my previous experiences. And I think this creates even more of an emphasis on why we all should be thinking about how are we measuring the strategic impact that an HR business partner can have on a business? Because I think it creates the business case. And it kind of takes a little bit of the guesswork out of it. And so it is a way of not only relying on relationship building to build trust, but also being able to bring the quantitative evidence behind it also.
Those are both great points. I mean, your point, Ashley, I think highlights the importance of HRBPs contracting with their leaders around what is my role and responsibility here, and what are the expectations, as you said, that rather than leaving it to maybe what was a relationship with the prior kind of HRBP. And I think your points as well, Ryan, around what I hear from a lot of CHROs, they look at the HRBPs really trying to, it's great, like leverage your strengths, but also having that comfort to kind of move beyond those areas that you may really be proficient in. I think that's where they often face the challenge, is like, how do I get this person to really kind of take some risks and scale things that might be out of their comfort zone, a bit. So good points. There's another question that came in, it deals with the slide that you have up right now around, technology and how technology can really maybe free up capacity, allow HRBPs to, focus their attention more on some of these strategic aspects. Yeah, any examples that you've come across or heard about that seem to be, making some headway there?
Yeah. When we're thinking about technology, the hot topic right now is artificial intelligence and finding ways to leverage that technology to free up time for HRBPs to do more strategic work. I've seen just specific examples to me. I've been on interviews where the head of HR was using a note-taking AI tool to essentially like take notes while having the one-on-one conversation with me. And so we're thinking about how do we leverage AI to basically free up some of this work. technology streamlines processes, it provides data-driven insights, and also enhances communication. And leveraging HR systems, AI, and analytics helps HRBPs identify trends, improve workforce planning, and focus on strategy instead of admin tasks, which a lot of times we've heard a lot of the people are focusing on. So really, just to put it plainly, technology and artificial intelligence specifically is just a way for HRBPs to get back to doing the work they were hoping to do and that they do best, which is the strategy. So just finding a way to, it doesn't have to be all technology, because I think that's also a fear as well. It's like, is tech going to take my job? Is tech going to be able to overrun what I do? But that's not really the case. It's about finding ways to really partner with this technology to be able to drive more strategic outcomes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Ryan. And I mean, I thought it's, simple examples like a chat bot where employees can go and get answers to simple questions or guidance on how do I change my address, get, access this benefit or that. So again, those more kind of routine transactional things, if you kind of can get that off the HRBP's plate, then it gives them the bandwidth to, as you said, engage in some of these other really value add activities. Another question here, big one, is, best practices for measuring strategic impact, right? I mean, both of you noted this, that, at the end of the day, how do we really kind of measure success and impact around the role? Any kind of thoughts, best practices, ideas that you have for KPIs companies might want to look at, or just kind of ways to start thinking about that?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that no one has quite cracked the nut on. I know right after the literature review early on in this process that Ryan and I were kind of like racking our own minds of like, how do you begin to disentangle what an HRBP is doing in relation to like, what is their impact on an actual outcome? I don't know if we came across anything that concretely we can point to. I think it's one of those areas that, once again, we need to assess what are the KPIs of the given project within it, and then thinking about where are those potential touch points for an HR business partner. So is it perhaps an area where we're being able to leverage people analytics within that? So like, are we looking at not just simply our retention number, like at a point in time, but really tracking it kind of more long-term to be able to see what are those long-term changes, especially since we know when it comes to people analytics, so many of these things aren't things that are just simply a simple output. They're really more outcome driven. And so it does take a longer time horizon for us to be able to actually see what the impact was.
Definitely, and I think that's why contracting and relationship building in this work is so important as well. Because since we can't provide, right now, due to the capacity of our research, ways to measure impact, I think that's why it's so important to be able to be in alignment with the business leader you're working with, right? Being able to contract and be able to develop those within the partnership, we think is a great place to start.
Yeah, I like that idea, Ryan. I mean, we're hearing about this idea of, return on expectations instead of return on investment, right? It's like, what are the expectations? How am I supposed to be adding value? And then let's come back later and see if I actually did that. But in order to do that, I think you obviously have to set those expectations up front, in those contracting conversations. I know we're getting close to time, but maybe a couple more quick questions. How do you communicate role definition, or think about the role definition standardization piece that you're talking about in an environment where maybe the HRBP role has shifted, has really kind of maybe gone from this HR generalist to more of a HR business partner, role? How might an organization think about the role definition in those contexts? Any thoughts?
A great question. Ryan, yeah, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah. I'm thinking just about first thinking about the needs of the organization, right? I think that's kind of where you start. I think people are quick to just jump and create this HRBP role without really like analyzing and looking to see like what do we actually need, like who needs support, and what is the best case scenario of this position. So I think a lot of times in a changing world with the position constantly evolving, I would say like the first thing that should be looked at as a business is what do we need the most, right? And then kind of creating a role out of that. And that's why I think we created the name in the first place, a part of a whole, right? So we don't want HRBPs because they're oftentimes becoming siloed. We really want them to be integrated into the business. But in order to do that, you first have to look and see what are the needs. So performing an assessment and then creating rules off of that, as opposed to vice versa.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing I think I would also add to what Ryan was saying is the importance of doing capacity mapping. So not just simply identifying like what we think the needs are, but actually being like, what are we asking, not only an HR business partner, but the different people that they touch. So looking at a people manager versus looking at maybe there's a direct report underneath them, and better understanding what are all the tasks that are our priorities for right now, and what are the priorities coming down the pipeline, and then what are their capacities being mapped to? Because if that capacity isn't accurately being mapped, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Makes sense. Well, I know we're already a few minutes over, so just want to quickly thank everyone for coming. Certainly thank Ryan and Ashley for a great presentation. Again, great work throughout the semester. Would like to highlight that we're in the process of building out our calendar of events for the first half of 2025. We already have 2 events on the calendar that you see here. We're running, J.R. Keller, colleague, is running a virtual working group around new developments in the area of structured interviewing. So if you're working in the talent acquisition space or you have colleagues that are, this might be a great one to attend just to see what the newest and latest is. That's January 15th at noon. And I will be doing another CAHRS cast at the end of January to report out the findings of our annual survey around what are HR leaders thinking about really as they head into the new year. So you can go to our website and view our events and register for any that may be of interest. And please check back regularly in January and onward because we'll be posting additional events as well. And I also want to highlight, because I saw some questions come in around how do we develop these competencies that Ashley and Ryan so nicely have highlighted, or how do we measure the strategic impact? And again, this is part of a broader and larger project that CAHRS will be continuing to work on in the spring in support of some of our incoming new CAHRS research assistants will be helping us out with the spring, and certainly thinking about what are some key ways to develop these competencies and to measure impact will be focus of that ongoing work. So you can look to hear more from us in the spring as we continue to develop this work and some of the resources associated with it. So again, thanks Ryan and Ashley, great work, and thanks for all of you for attending, and wish everyone happy holidays and a great new year. Thank you.